Okay, all right. I think I'm more or less all set here. Having a case of the Mondays, definitely. There we go. All right, so welcome back to Source of Religion, Source 376. And yeah, so I think today is ad drop, so this is probably about what the makeup of the class is going to look like. I think a few people left and then jumped in kind of late. But okay, nevertheless, if you have any questions, let me know. You can come talk to me after class if you just joined the course. Because I know at least one person, I think, jumped in on Saturday. Okay, so last week, right? Last week we sort of worked through our definition of what is religion, right? So we spent, the first 4 lectures really just kind of working through this question of what is religion, according to Smith's definition. And now we're basically on to like how Smith thinks religion works. And specifically, what it does, and what it does that makes it different from, say, any other social institution, right? Because if we think about, those functional and, well, especially the functional definitions of religion, right? A lot of those things can be things that are done by other social institutions outside of religion. So what makes religion unique, right? Okay, so according to Smith, and he keeps coming back to this sort of proposition, the essence of religion is that it's practices that are meant to access superhuman powers for things like blessings. I know we went over this last time, but we'll just kind of review very quickly because the weekend erases memories. Or is that tequila? I can't remember which. There is a very famous country song that tequila makes her clothes fall off, but that's not quite the same. Okay, and she wears a lampshade on her head or something. I don't know. I don't like country music, but my in-laws love it. So, focus. I'm coming back from the weekend. My daughter missed the bus this morning, so my whole morning routine is like shot because I had to drive her to school. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of things that religion does, right, are things that are done by other social institutions, right? So things like community, ecstatic experiences, right, identity, Smith talks about, are all things that happen outside of religious communities. So what makes religion unique, right? And again, that's not to say that those aspects of religion are not important to the people who belong to a religious community, but it's not the core for Smith. No, it's my phone reminding me that I'm supposed to be here right now. What? Oh, yes, my class just started. That's very good. Okay, so the one we ended off on, I believe on Friday, was we were talking about identity, right? The religion can, in fact, shape identity, right? So it can shape personal identity, your distinct understanding, right, of who you are. Religion definitely does this. Group identities, right? You are Muslim, you are Catholic, you are Jewish, you are Protestant, evangelical, just Christian, I guess nothing in particular isn't a religion, but we'll talk about the nuns later in the course. But anyway, religion shapes group identities, the group to whom you belong to, and what it means to be part of that group, who they are, right? What membership means in this group. And social identity, a social group's collective sense of belonging, which emerges from joint self-definition, right? We all agree that we are all, movementarians. And so we all have this shared kind of understanding, and for a common social location, like where you are physically, and shared emotional investments, right? Now, all of these things, as Smith says, they aren't unique to religion because all of these things can belong to other groups, right? You can have personal identity shaped by a whole lot of other things, right? From all the way from, nationalism to fandom in a particular TV show, right? There are people who are very deeply committed to their fandom in Star Trek, right? Or Star Wars, or My Little Pony, or any of these sorts of things, right? So personal identity can be shaped by that. Group identities in the same way, right? And a social identity in that same kind of sense, right? These can all happen outside of religion. So they're important to religion, but they're not what makes religion religion. Community as well, right? This is one that often, those kind of functional definitions will point to as being an important aspect of religion, right? Belonging, membership in a relationally significant social group, right? That is definitely something that religion does, right? People who attend religious services or are part of a religious community find belonging in those. So sometimes, obviously not always, but it's definitely an aspect of what it means, right? You are known at your gurdwara, you're known at your temple, you're known at your mosque, the synagogue, right? You belong there, people know you, people talk to you, you have a relationship with them, there's a sense of belonging within those communities. Social solidarity, right? Cohesion and integration, right? Shared kind of values and a sense of who you are built from, and your relationship to other people built from being part of, this kind of group. Smith's wording is a little bit more academic-y, right? The cohesion and integration derived from a place in effectively significant social networks, right? So you have a place in an emotionally significant, right? Affect is emotion. Significant social networks of relatively homogenous groups, right? So most of the people share kind of common beliefs. There's a good chance, in a lot of cases with religious groups, they also share common kind of heritage, whether it's ethnicity or something else, right? So kind of bonded together in social solidarity. Social support, right? So there's that support aspect of communities, right? Like you have a baby and the community brings you frozen meals for the first 3 weeks of the life of your baby, or they're there to help you in other ways. Someone gets sick, and so the community kind of comes together to drive your kids to activities and kind of help you while you're in that moment, right? All these sorts of things would be in that social support kind of, right? So cared, assisted, comforted by others in social relationships. I mean, something even like sitting Shiva, right? So like in Judaism, especially Orthodox forms, when someone dies, there's this period of mourning, right? Where I think it's 7 days, where people come to your house, right? People from the community come to your house and they sort of share in your grief, right? You kind of travel through that experience of grief at someone having died together, right? And everybody, they bring food, they bring resources, and they are there to comfort and support you while you are mourning, right? For those first 7 days. And that's, that would be, comforting, right? And other things like that. So all of those things happen in religious groups. Now, again, all of these things, and why Smith doesn't think these are constitutive of religion, but a sort of secondary product of them, is because all of these things theoretically and realistically do happen in other kinds of non-religious groups, right? You have belonging and membership. You have, social cohesion amongst a relatively homogenous group, and you certainly have social support in communities that aren't religious, right? So it's not necessarily exclusive. Okay. I think, let me check. I might have mislabeled chapter 2, chapter 4. Let me double check on that. I thought it was chapter 2, but I might have mislabeled it on the syllabus. I will double check. The one that I care about is the one that I uploaded. So go read that one, but I will double check. Okay, can I review the difference between interventionist and discursive practices again? So interventionist practices, right, are attempts to get access to superhuman powers, right? So it's prayer, it's meditation, it's the wearing of amulets, right? It's how do you get power from the superhuman in a way that's positive for you. Discursive practices is teaching, right? Passing on of religious teaching and doctrine in whatever way it happens to happen, right? But it's the sort of passing on and teaching practices. Hopefully that makes sense. The difference between belonging and social solidarity. Okay, so belonging is more kind of an individualized sense, right? You feel like you have membership in this group, right? So from a personal kind of level, you have belonging, right? You feel like you belong to this group. Social solidarity is more, you're in, I guess, the Durkheimian kind of sense. is you're embedded in a net of social relationships, right? So think about it, I don't know, like like a network, right? You always see these like images of like social networks where it's like, you know, you have the individual and then there's like a bunch of sticks rating it out to other individuals. That's more social solidarity, right? When you're in a community, right, and a religious community, certainly, you are put into a network of people, right? So you feel a sense of belonging on a personal level, and social solidarity, right? You're cohered inside this. This is, you know, fundamentally why, you know, when we think about Durkheim and some of his work on religion, he talked about social solidarity, particularly in the context of suicide, right? If you remember, hopefully you've heard about Durkheim's work on suicide. If not, very quick reminder. One of the things that Durkheim found, looking at kind of late 19th, early 20th century kind of numbers around suicide, was that the higher the degree of social solidarity, right, the more you were kind of connected into a group to which you had kind of regular interactions, the less likely you were to take your own life, right? So despite the fact that Jews in kind of 19th century Germany had high levels of what were called mental disorders, right, or psychological disorders, they had a low rate of suicide because their communities were so tightly knit that they were in constant contact. They had high levels of social solidarity. They felt very supported, whereas people who were, you know, less connected to their communities, you know, mainline Protestants, atheists, had much higher rates of suicide, simply because for Durkheim, they were less embedded in networks of people that held them accountable, that were in constant contact, that would catch when, you know, psychologically things were going badly for them, this kind of thing. I have to stop standing with my shoulder facing this wall because I will never see anyone in this corner if I do that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, too many questions. All right, I think I got that. We're going to talk about ecstatic experiences in a second, so let's just hold off on that for a moment. What is my thought on research suggesting that youth can benefit from interacting with people of all ages in religious institutions in terms of success in jobs? I mean, I think the research to me seems pretty uncontroversial that young people broadly benefit. This is a little bit truer of young women, but it's true of young men as well, from kind of mixed age communities where they interact with people not just of their own generational cohort, but with others. They do better in terms of all sorts of markers, things like, in terms of job success, yes, but relationships as well, right? Especially this has been noted with young women, is that older women will give them good advice. You know, hey, that guy ain't no good. Having lived a life of experience, you know, dealing with men and their BS, older women will advise young women in ways that are less like, oh, but he's so dreamy, right? Which was more like what their peers would say. So there's a range. Sorry, this is like a deep dive on an aside. There's a ton of research on a bunch of different contexts that suggests that it's not necessarily unique to religion. Again, religious institutions just happen to be ones that are very mixed age and that encourage kind of mixing between age groups. But it's broadly beneficial for young people to, you know, have the mentorship and advice of people of different generations. So I mean, I think it's fairly uncontroversial. And again, it doesn't have to be limited to religion. It just is one of the few social locations left that we have in society where people of different ages do actually mix. Increasingly, we're very age segregated. Okay, all right. See, I have experiences here. So, ecstatic experiences in both religion and non-religion. Okay, yeah, we'll touch on that. Okay, so meaning, right? Obviously, religion at its best would probably be quite good at offering meaning, right? So a moral order, right? Kind of a moral order, right? A code. What is right? What is wrong? These are pretty clearly laid out in religions. What is good, right, proper in relations amongst persons and groups, right? So on a kind of moral order level, should you cheat on that test? Is it okay to cheat on your partner, right? All of these things are kind of built into the moral order of religions. Now, again, not unique, right? There is a kind of societal moral order that prevails as well. Now, I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the things that I know that I talk about in sociology of youth and that I'll talk about again here for certain later in the course, is that the moral order that's provided by religion is very clear-cut, right? And it gives people sort of moral shortcuts. They don't have to make they have to make as many moral decisions, but they don't have to think about them in the same way, because they have a very, should you steal? No. Why? God said so, right? As opposed to sometimes people make more ad hoc decisions outside of religious systems, like, should I steal? Well, am I going to get caught? If I'm going to get caught, no. We see this in the criminology literature as well, right? People who have well-practiced kind of moral systems where they don't have to make a decision, because for them no decision has to be made, tend to make better moral choices. But anyway, religion does offer that, at least in part. Okay, moral orders, right? A normative system, just a system that tells you what's right and wrong, how you should relate to people, how you should treat people, and all of these things. Cosmic or life meaning, like what is the ultimate significance or purpose of life and the universe, right? Religions offer these. Theoretically, other systems offer it as well, though probably not as much. And then theodicy, a specific term that basically is like explanations for suffering, injustice, and death, right? Why do bad things happen? What do they mean, right? And I mean, religions obviously all have different stories of why bad things happen, right? Without kind of going into what they are, right? There's lots of, there's a whole body of literature, say in Christian theology, and I'm sure in Muslim theology, I know in Jewish theology, as to why bad things happen to good people, why good things happen to bad people. All of this is kind of contained in this idea of theodicy. And I'm sure there are secular theodicies as well, right? These are not unique to religion, right? I guess the theodicy in kind of a secular sense would be, why do bad things happen? Well, because the universe is just random and uncaring, right? And that would be kind of the reason. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, expressions and experiences. Sorry, now I'm thinking of your question. What would be an ecstatic, do I have a question slide? But I'll go back. An ecstatic experience in both religion and non-religion context. See, now that I made it to my slide, I can think about this. So let's say an ecstatic experience in a religious context would be like you're praying or meditating and you feel, very much the rush of the spirit or God or transcendence or enlightenment or whatever it happens to be. That would be a kind of ecstatic experience. Sometimes people in certain contexts, have very ecstatic experiences of kind of their experience of the transcendent or the supernatural or the superhuman, right? They might start singing or screaming or speaking in tongues or any of these sorts of things. In a non-religious context, you're at that Taylor Swift concert. Tay-Tay is up on the stage. You spent probably your life savings on the tickets. And she's singing and you're like in it with the crowd. You feel this kind of, I don't know, I'm sure you've all sort of had an experience kind of like this, right? Where you're in a crowd of people, at a concert or something like that, and you feel kind of moved in some way, right? Like you're moving with the music. You're somehow emotionally elevated, right? Because you're so into this I see you nodding, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? You're just, the music is doing something to you, right? And you feel something kind of more than just your everyday experience. Like you're in it with the crowd. You're all these people kind of worshiping Taylor Swift together. No, wait. No, that's probably right. Or whatever, experiencing Taylor Swift's music and costumes and the whole shebang. And there's something kind of ecstatic about it, right? You're all sharing in this experience. And that would be a kind of non-religious kind of ecstatic experience in a sense, right? So much so that I remember, what was it? It was someone who had deconverted from Christianity. And he had been, someone who went to a lot of, say, Christian concerts and had these kinds of ecstatic experiences where he felt like, the Holy Spirit moving him. And then he went to like, I don't know, some other secular concert, I can't remember which one it was, and felt kind of something that he thought was akin and was like, oh, maybe what I had was not a religious experience at all. And then it made him question everything. we'll say his religious foundation was not particularly deep, I guess. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if Taylor Swift is a good example, but we'll go with it. Okay, expressions and experiences, right? So all sorts of things, that come out of religion. And again, all of these things can come out of other things as well. Artistic creations, right? The crafting of buildings or aesthetic, expressive or attractive objects or performances, right? So people make stuff for religious reasons, right? All the way from little things like, rosaries. People do like liturgical dance or other forms of, if you look at, say, indigenous spiritualities, right, there's a lot of drumming, right, these kinds of performances and the crafting of the drums and all of these sorts of things, right? Artistic creations, come from religion, often for the purposes of religion itself, right, to serve a kind of religious purpose. But obviously, right, all of those things can happen for non-religious reasons, right? So yes, religious people create things, right? They create buildings that are part of their religious experience. And I'll show you a clip, just to kind of illustrate, to what extent this can happen. They create objects, right? Religious objects, statues, paintings, stained glass, medallions, amulets, right? All sorts of things that are basically part of the religious experience. But all of those things can be created for non-religious reasons as well. Aesthetic expressions, outward expressions of subjective feelings, ideas, and desires through singing, dancing, shouting, speaking, drama, facial expressions, etc., right? People express their religion in visible and aesthetic ways. And transcendent experiences, right? Encounters or events of joy, awe, enlightenment, terror, raptures, ecstasy, divine union, and all the things I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, right? These are all things that can be experienced through religion. Now, transcendent experiences, right? You can have sort of transcendent experiences that are secular as well, right? And I've certainly talked to students in the past that, when I kind of talked on this point, they were like, yeah, I was in Thailand, and, out in the middle of the night, and the moon rose over the temples in Thailand, and I suddenly felt like this transcendent experience of like communion with nature or the universe or something like that, right? So all of these things, they might be more typical in some ways of, I guess, especially the transcendent experiences of religion, but they all exist in non-religious contexts as well. Okay, I will take a half second to breathe here. I'll show you this, like just to get a sense, especially of this artistic kind of sense where, religions make stuff. I've got 2 minutes? 4 minutes. We'll go with that. And we might stop it in the middle just to give you a sense. It comes from a documentary series made by a guy. He was a priest at the time, Father Robert Barron. He's still a priest, I guess, but now he's the Bishop of Winona, Rochester in Minnesota. And he just is talking about specifically the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris.
Let us consider first the beatific vision, one of the most beautiful symbols of which can be found in the great Cathedral of Notre Dame.
St. Thomas Aquinas, who would have known this building when he was professor of theology in Paris, said that the human spirit is structured in such a way that it pushes beyond itself toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. The mind seeks the truth, and it finds it to some degree in this world, but it's never enough because the mind seeks absolute truth. The will seeks the good, and it finds it to some degree within this world, but it's never enough finally to satisfy the will. The soul seeks the beautiful, and to a limited degree, it finds it, it achieves it in this world, but it's ordered toward the beautiful itself. There's a kind of holy longing in us. There's an aching, a restlessness that pushes us beyond anything in this world toward a transcendent truth, a transcendent goodness, a transcendent beauty.
This is why, as C.S. Lewis so clearly saw, the most exquisite experiences in life, aesthetic pleasure, sexual intimacy, deep friendship, are always accompanied by a certain aching sadness, a sense that there must still be something more. Heaven is what corresponds to that desire beyond desire.
I didn't remember that there was such a long introduction.
Searching.
Okay,
The
Rob.
mind and the will, despite or because of all their achievements here below, still want definitively to see. I first laid eyes on the North Rose window at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on
This is
June
where I
12,
meant to start the video.
1989. When I saw the rose window, I stood mesmerized for 20 minutes by its sheer beauty. Then, every single day that I was in Paris until I returned home for Christmas, I went to that spot and stared. The great wheel of the North Rose window, with its myriad parts in harmonious interconnection and with the sunlight shining through it, certainly qualifies as a beautiful thing. But its beauty is in service of a higher good, for it's meant to be a foretaste of the beauty of the beatific vision. One of the clues of this transcendent purpose is in the window's numeric symbolism. Around the central figures of Christ and his mother are 8 small circles. Then, on the next major row, we find 16 circular images, médaillons in French. And on the next, twice 16, 32 images. And then finally, another row of 32. If we add 32, 32, 16, and 8, we arrive at 88. In a word, the entire window is an artistic meditation on the number 8. Then we recall that 8 is a symbol of eternity, since it stands immediately outside of 7, which evokes the 7 days of the week, or the completed cycle of time. Another clue is found in the very complexity and inexhaustibility of its composition. Why was I drawn for so many days to look at that road?
We'll never know. Okay, so I mean, hopefully you get the sense, right? Like, this is something, you know, the building itself of Notre Dame de Paris, which I just checked, is scheduled to reopen after the fire in December of 2024, which is good news because the rose window survived the fire, which is because it is a fantastic piece of art, right? But these are things that were created, you know, they're artistic expressions of, you know, whatever theology happens to be built into them, you know, outside the cycle of time, all that fun stuff, right? They're meant, you know, to express something. And again, you can have, I mean, secular or like modern architecture is pretty ugly on the whole, but, you know, you still have art and these things created for secular purposes as well, right? So these things happen in religion. They're not exclusive to it. Oh, sorry. You're in my shoulder distance. Yes.
What is the difference between ecstatic and transcendent experiences? Are they pretty similar?
I mean, an ecstatic experience is probably just like you're in a kind of, it typically happens in kind of group worship or group, I guess, not even worship. I'm saying this from a religious perspective, but kind of in a group, right? Where you all kind of have the same feeling. What does Durkheim call this? Collective effervescence. It's like bubbles, right? Think of like a soda when you open it and it's all bubbly. That's kind of what it is. Like all of you are kind of bubbling with a kind of common energy, right? Like at the Taylor Swift concert or, you know, at the Pentecostal worship service. It's all kind of the same thing. You're all, you know, kind of collectively experiencing some kind of like experience, right? I suppose you can have an ecstatic experience by yourself. It's more common, I think, in groups, right? Versus a transcendent experience is like where you're connecting with something greater than yourself, right? It's like a sense of connecting with some kind of something that transcends you, right? So it can be like, you know, God or Shiva or the Holy Spirit or Allah or, you know, whatever it happens to be. Is my phone? I'm getting a phone. Okay, I will. My daughter was late. Now the school thinks she's not there. Okay, all good. But yeah, does that make sense, right? and like I said, a transcendent experience can be like a communion with nature as well, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, the moon, and I am so connected with nature, and we are all so small. People actually say, like when William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk on Star Trek, went up in the space shuttle, or not the space shuttle, the Jeff Bezos penis-shaped shuttle. He kind of said he had a similar experience, like seeing the Earth from orbit, right? The sense of like, oh wow, I'm so small. The Earth is so fragile. I feel connected to it in some way. Does that make sense?
Like ecstatic experiences like on the human level, or
Something bigger, right? Whether it's an actual superhuman thing or just like nature or something like that, right? That all makes it, yeah.
so like the concert is not an example of the transcendent experience?
Unless, I wouldn't think so. It's more an ecstatic experience, right? Unless you're communing with Taylor Swift and you think she's God, which, I mean, some people do, right? But yeah, no, it's just an ecstatic experience.
Is the ecstatic expression like from the reading? Because it's not in the lecture?
What's that, sorry?
Ecstatic expression, is that from the reading?
I think it's from the readings. Oh, you mean this question? That the person's question from that? I mean, I think it was mentioned in one of the past lectures. I don't remember where. Don't ask me. I wrote it down so I wouldn't have to remember. But it's in there in one of the past lectures. Okay. Ooh, there are questions. Hang on. So a church building, yes. Church buildings, temples, definitely artistic expressions. Can having a baby or a marriage be considered a transcendent experience? I guess that depends on how people experience it, right? So I've certainly heard this, accounts, especially from women, after they give birth to their first child, where they do have something that you might consider like almost a transcendent experience. The experience of having this new life in your hands connects them with something greater. So yeah, I think that's reasonable to say. A marriage, I don't know, maybe. I can't think of how, but maybe I've been married too long. I don't know. I don't know. It's a long time ago for me. Is there an opposite to a transcendent experience? Like is something called? I mean, I think I think the opposite would be an immanent experience, right? Where you're like transcendent would be grounded in the greater, and immanent would be grounded in the here and now. Something like calls the divine. If something calls to the divine, can something be called to damnation? I think like it would still be considered like a transcendent experience, right? I've certainly heard of people say doing like mushrooms and then having like the experience of like demons or like a very negative vision, right? Like evil spirits were attacking them. And I would still sort of put that as a transcendent experience in some sense. It wouldn't necessarily be a very positive one, but you're still kind of interacting with something that's like greater than the human, right? That would be my answer. These are, Mormon questions. I'm going to have to punt on that one in that if I'm being 100% honest, my knowledge of specific LDS practices is not 100%. Latter-day Saints or Mormons, right? See, I knew what you were talking about when you said LDS. But yeah, LDS Mormons, I don't know. I'd have to actually dig into that one. Maybe I'll leave it up. But I don't know how it's framed in Mormonism, to be honest. I'll have to think about that because I don't know. And like I said, I don't know every... different things. This is why I go with Mormon instead of LDS, so that I don't screw this up and say LSD at some point. But yeah, I will check because I'm not actually sure. And Mormon theology is extremely unique in some senses, and I have a grasp of it, but not as good as I would like to. There are only so many religious teachings I can put into my brain, to be honest. Okay, whoops. All right, forward. Okay, is there one more? There's one. Oh, yeah. Hang on. Social control is our last one. Did not think this would take 36 minutes, but that's okay. All right, social control. All right, so social control can come in different forms, right? So internalized self-regulation, voluntary compliance with established norms, right? This is like what Foucault talks about in a sense, right? Where the whole society teaches you that you need to obey the rules, and you then obey the rules of your own free will, right? You internalize the means of your own repression in Foucault's sense. But yeah, religion certainly does that. But then there are other forms of internalized self-control as well, right? That are, excuse me, that are secular. And yeah, interpersonal controls, right? Compliance with established norms of thought and behavior through informal rewards and sanctions, communicated through relational interactions, right? So certainly in religious groups, right? If someone, breaks norms, there's often consequences, right? They might be shunned by their religious community. They might be, informally punished, pushed out of certain groups, right? There's all sorts of ways that interpersonal controls are, they might be gossiped about and they don't like that. There's all sorts of ways. And obviously that happens in non-religious settings as well. And formal social controls, right? Compliance with established norms through institutional means, right? So there's some kind of institutional way in which you're disciplined for bad behavior, right? Maybe you're, excommunicated from the church, right, because of something you did, right? Or you're thrown in jail because you committed a crime, right? These are both formal forms of social control. So again, all of this exists both in the religious and the non-religious. Okay. So yeah, what Smith says, well, all of the above are important in religious communities, right? All of these things happen and are important. None of them exist solely within religion, and so I think this is the point to stress. They can't be said to be a key aspect of religion, right? So, I mean, in a sense, very much Smith is taking Durkheim's religious definition of religion is all about social solidarity and throwing it in the waste bin, because he's like, yeah, but social solidarity can exist in other contexts as well, right? So that can't be a key aspect of religion if it exists outside of religion as well, right? It's only those things that would be, for Smith, that are things that only religion does, that we can truly say are constitutive of religion. Everything else, orbits around the core of religion, which again, not to put too fine a point on it, accessing or aligning with superhuman forces to achieve good outcomes and avoid things bad, right? So everything else, right, that we tend to think of religion is community, religion is prayer, all of those things are potentially part of religion, but they can't be kind of key to religion because they exist in other contexts, right? So that's, again, Smith is trying to narrow this down to avoid things like calling American nationalism civil religion, right? He doesn't want to kind of fall into that I'm being so mean to Robert Bella, all course, but he doesn't want to fall into that trap of, bringing in a bunch of things and then being like, well, what about this thing that is kind of like religion in a sense? He's trying to be very clear about that. Yeah, please.
That American nationalism could technically be a religion if you look at some definitions. I know there's one offshoot brand of Christianity happening where they think Donald Trump is the second coming. How would that fit into all
Those people are crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I can't even fathom how that fits in. I mean, I guess they've sort of deified Donald Trump. That's a particularly repulsive thought. Sorry, not a big Trump fan. I mean, to be a fan of a politician is like being a fan of a burning dumpster. They're all morally absolutely disgusting. But nevertheless, I don't think much of politicians. Any of them. I don't care what their political alignments are. Yeah, I don't know how that... I mean, obviously they're sort of taking, communing with Trumpiness in a sort of weirdly divine sense. But yeah, it's clearly a sort of... we could call it a sect, a weird one, which hopefully does not become its own church at some point. I presume Donald Trump will die someday, although he might have had so much Diet Coke at this point that he's perfectly preserved forever. I don't know. Who can say? Sorry, does that answer your question? I know I just called a bunch of people crazy and probably insulted someone else, but I mean, what are you going to do? Okay. All right. So, I know. I get a little off-topic-y sometimes. So yeah, historically and in the present, most people and societies have been religious in some way, right? Like if we look globally, religion is doing pretty good. Most people in the world today are religious in some way, shape, or form. So, and I mean, historically, right, religion's important. One of the things that Smith will say, and this will come up too when we talk about the religious landscape, is human beings seem to have a sort of religious potential. Right? Not everyone is religious, but everyone seems to, like human beings and human societies have the potential to be religious at any given time, right? And so even people who are at one moment non-religious, right, sometimes then become religious later on. So there is that potentiality in human beings, right? So, I mean, because most people historically and in the present have been religious in some way, it's worth studying. This is an area of study that's worth looking at on its own, right? Religion also has causal power, right? It makes things happen in people and societies, right? And these can be things, that we consider very good. These can be things that we consider very bad. And yet it still has kind of causal power within societies, right? Much of kind of how society is organized is often organized along at least tacitly religious lines, right? A lot of the ideas that make up a civilization are ultimately kind of religious at their core. It's not necessarily different from other social institutions in the sense that it can make things happen, but it does seem to have a unique ability at times to kind of change how society is organized, or cause revolutions or these kinds of things, right? According to Smith, religion exerts causal influence by nearly all the same processes that other social practices, institutions, and types of culture do. Religion does so in a particular way, right? That religion is a little bit different from other social institutions in that it has a different kind of order to it. Okay, and this is principally not so much in what it does, but why it does it, right? Which is seeking to access superhuman powers, right? That's why religion does what it does, right? It's not necessarily oriented towards the immanent, right? It's not necessarily oriented towards, just achieving things for the good of society. Those things can happen for religious reasons, but mostly it is, because it is trying to access superhuman powers, right? That is what, according to Smith, makes religion unique. And I agree with him. Obviously, I wouldn't put forward this definition if I didn't think he was correct, and I wouldn't have spent, all this time on his definition of religion if I didn't think this was the best definition of religion from a sociological perspective that you can find, right? This quote from Smith: "Under certain social circumstances, the unique character of human interest in religion and things superhuman can generate a level of intensity, depth, and persistence in people's motivation, commitments, and endurance not often seen in non-religious life," right? Just think of I'll give the example of, say, someone like Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, right? Who went and sort of worked with the poor in the slums of Calcutta in India for decades and decades and decades, right? Just kind of treating them, giving them the medical care they could, treating basically a lot of the Dalits, people who were kind of cast down by Indian society, right? That's something that seems to be kind of, for the most part, unique religiously, right? Very persistent, very high intensity, high motivation, and someone who would do this for their entire life, essentially. And this one I think is interesting, and I think some people would debate this, but I think it's probably correct. Religious ideas help shape the categories, assumptions, and dispositions of entire cultures and civilizations to a much greater extent than do non-religious beliefs. There's a kind of interesting argument going on right now, on the kind of fringe, I think, between academic culture and popular culture, about especially the degree to which, say, the West right now is ultimate, and even the West in its kind of post-Christian secular form, is still carrying around a lot of Christian ideas and assumptions without necessarily kind of tacitly wanting to admit it. And you'll find this, I think the most interesting one, I think I have him on a coming slide. Oh, it's a few slides away yet, but so we won't get to it till next time. From Tom Holland, who's not, as far as I know, a religious person, that the West is so deeply kind of affected by its Christian roots, right, that most of the assumptions even of kind of post-Christian kind of Western society ultimately find their roots kind of in Latin Christianity. So I talked about this at the beginning of the course, right, when I was talking about like this idea of this split between, say, the secular and the religious, that these things are sort of unique aspects, and this is a kind of strangely Western idea that's been exported to other parts of the world. That's kind of, in a sense, though there's a lot more, what I mean there, right? And this, I think Smith is kind of pointing at the same thing, right? Say, India is going to be very much shaped by Hinduism, right? And its whole social structure is affected by it. Its assumptions about the world, its dispositions are set that way. Somewhere like Turkey is going to be, very much influenced by Islam. Yeah, please.
Could we say that maybe the reason is because religion is passed down through generations with just kind of like, not blind acceptance, but people not really researching the why behind it? So is it possible that it gets to a point where you have so many people not knowing the why, they're just like, well, we do this because we do it, not for religious purposes, because they don't realize there were religious purposes, like the knock on wood. That stems from like pleasing tree spirits.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't care to, like, I have to be a much better historian than I am to kind of make that sort of claim, to be honest. For whatever reason, right, it does seem to establish these very deep patterns of belief about what the world is, what good and bad is, how a society should be structured. We'll talk about that next time. But yeah, for whatever reason, right, it seems to have this unique power, maybe because of its long duration, right? Because something like, Christianity or Islam can be thousands of years, or Hinduism, right, which is thousands, like 4,000 or 5,000 years old. It can deeply shape, human cultures in ways that, say, Justin Trudeau will never shape Canada as deeply as that, because he's going to be here for 8 years, maybe 10 at most, and then people will get sick of him. Whereas religion has that long kind of historical duration. So, all right, we have 1 minute left, but I'm not going to try to do anything else in 1 minute. We will see you on Wednesday, because sadly today is still Monday.